As you know, our speakers today are alumni of the most recent Young Leaders Conference, the historic class of 2021. And we have a large number of their classmates on this call as well. And I want to give a special shout out to those brave members of the class of 2021 who gathered together in November for this, what I would call a historic conference. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it was amazing to have this window of opportunity, this in the eye of the storm, it now looks like, of the COVID pandemic, a time when travel and gatherings of large numbers of people suddenly became possible. And we had an almost normal conference. It was substantive, it was intense, it was highly structured, a little bit exhausting for everyone, just the way we know those programs to be. And of course, many of the viewers today are alumni of the program, and you will remember your time at the Young Leaders Conference as one where you are inspired by your classmates and by your conversations and have an amazing opportunity to establish new human connections, something that has been terribly lacking during this pandemic time. We've tried to maintain our relationships with people we knew, but to create new connections with other leaders who are trying to solve the same problems, with a diversity of people from business and government, the media, with Swiss and Americans. It was so important to have that happen in November. As the pandemic has driven a wedge between people and between nations, we are trying to rebuild those bridges through our programs at the American Swiss Foundation by connecting and engaging with brilliant young people who will lead us out of this pandemic, we hope, very soon. The next generation of leaders is today represented by three wonderful alumni of this program, Florian Aigrain, Piers Bush, and Paige Gebhart. Let me give a quick introduction to each of them and then hand over to Marcus Dietam for remarks. Florian, our moderator, is the CEO of the Acutronic Group, a medium-sized engineering company in the aerospace and defense industry that is based in Switzerland and has major operations in the US, especially in Texas. And like so many small and medium-sized enterprises in Switzerland, it's a market leader globally in what it produces. So a great example of one of those really important companies that's based in Switzerland, makes an impact all around the world. And Florian, you're a very busy person. Thank you for taking the time to moderate the conversation today. Piers Bush is the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America Lone Star in Texas. He runs the largest affiliate of Big Brothers Big Sisters in the country. He is a leader of the nonprofit world. He joined the organization as a volunteer first, and then was so impressed by what they do that he left his career in finance to help manage and now runs the Texas affiliate of this organization. Thank you, Piers, for taking the time to join us today as well. And from government, we have Mayor Cognetti, the mayor of the City of Scranton. Paige runs a small city in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's well known as the childhood hometown of President Biden. And Mayor Cognetti was elected in January of 2020, and I think your almost entire tenure as mayor has been marked by the COVID pandemic. So you've done an incredible job leading your city. Earlier, Paige was a senior advisor to the Undersecretary for International Affairs at the Treasury Department during the Obama administration and held a number of other political positions. So I am so honored to have on this panel today a CEO from a major Swiss company, a nonprofit leader, and a government leader from the United States. Have this conversation about highlights and insights from the Young Leaders Conference. For our audience, you are welcome to put questions in the Q&A chat. We will get to them when we get to them. Florian will decide whether to integrate them into the conversation or wait until the end, but please don't hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A chat. And now I'd invite our co-chair, Marcus Dietam, to say a few words. Marcus, you were at the Young Leaders Conference. You were instrumental in the preparations of this conference with your legal expertise and your insights from the corporate perspective at UBS. It was so important to have that to make possible the conference. Thank you for also speaking at the opening dinner, hosting the great 75th anniversary dinner during the conference with 180 guests in Zurich. Hard to believe. Thank you, Marcus, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I'm very pleased to be on this ASF Connect call. We all know Patricia. She is an incredibly smooth presenter. Everything she does is seemingly effortless, but only Patricia and I know, and Bob, my partner and co-chairman, know that it was only because of the immense persuasive power of two brilliant lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic to tell Patricia she should have no worries, that we've looked at all the regulations and the conference is fine to go. I think there was quite a bit of trepidation ahead of the conference. So I'm very happy that we had the courage and the persuasive power to make it happen. It was the 30th conference since inception. Over 1,300 young leaders from Switzerland and America make part of the alumni. It is a conference that fell into a period where I was fearful that the dialogue would be such that people are very careful in how they express themselves. Of course, knowing how we pick young leaders, we pick people who have opinions, who are strong-minded. And when I opened the conference in Bonnaz, of course, I took reference to Pierce's grandmother, who was once reminded by a friend of someone having hurt her feelings, to which she responded, I distinctively remember having forgotten about that. And that was my plea for people to say that words matter, kindness matters, looks fade. And however, different our opinions are, inviting people to have a fresh and open dialogue. And yes, that includes maybe hurting feelings of others. You'll get over that if you are driven by a mindset which is at the core of this organization, to exchange ideas from two entirely different cultures, which evidently will lead to, gee, they really don't understand us, or gee, they get that totally wrong. And that's the purpose of bridging the two cultures, of having an open dialogue, and do so in the spirit. And again, Barbara Bush, she had a doormat where it was written, birds fly high because they take themselves lightly. So don't take yourself too seriously, have an open mind, speak up, speak out. And with that, even some of the more contentious issues that we have today, such as the free trade agreement, where we all know that the current administration is almost blocking that. I see on the audience, Peter Friedli is listening into that. I think he will soon have an opportunity to speak in Swiss television about that. It's precisely to look at those contentious issues, help each other through the brilliant minds that we select and that make up the alumni community to overcome political or other obstacles, and do so with a spirit of smart interaction, continuity of dialogue. You have, a candy store of people that you can select. At least it feels like that. And please take advantage of not just your class, but reach into others. That's the whole purpose of it. With that brief introduction, let me just end by saying I was very pleased that we could meet in person. I was very pleased to be at the Zunfthaus zu Meisen, to see you all. And every time I attend the Young Leaders Conference or I make introductions, I see the sparkles on people's eyes. They really, really love it. And it's not just what Swiss tourism does for them, because we have the benefit of a beautiful, quaint country that everyone likes, and we'll make sure you show them the best parts of it. But it's the interaction among you young people. And that gives me enormous pleasure. And with that, I want to hand over to the son of my former boss, Florian Aigrain. I worked for his father when he was the CEO at Swiss Re, and I can recognize the gene pool, Florian. So with your dedication and resolve, I'll hand over to you to lead the panel with Mayor Paige and Piers. Thank you very much.
Marcus, thank you for those generous words. I particularly touched and appreciative of your mentorship and your friendship over so many years. And we've now learned that we should be unbelievably grateful for your persuasive powers in helping to put on the November conference. So thank you very much. It really was a lot of fun. And I think I speak for all of us in saying that we had an absolutely delightful time in connecting with so many new people and new friends.
As everyone knows, we made it up on the fly, but it worked.
They worked extremely well. And Patricia, thank you for the kind introductions and for hosting us yet again on one of your superbly organized events. As has been already mentioned, the Young Leaders Class of 2021 met in mid-November last year in what now appears to have been the most fortuitous of timings, a window of calm between the Delta and Omicron waves. And I speak for all of us when I say that it was a rare privilege. We're all fondly aware of the long-standing ties between Switzerland and the United States, two great democracies, two dynamic economies. Switzerland's the 6th largest investor in the US. And I just read in one of Martin Naville's notes that the US may now have become the largest export market. So that's a remarkable development I'd like to start with a framing question, if you will, a sense of the feel and tone of the conference in November. What were the most significant discussions during the Young Leaders Conference week? What key insights did you garner? And how will those observations help you in your leadership responsibilities and aspirations in the future? And I will start with Paige, Your Honor.
Thank you, Florian, Marcus, Patricia, Anna, Rachel. I know Vanessa's not on today, but thanks, Patricia, to your team for everything in November. And we are so fortunate to have been able to be in person. The group just gelled in a way that, as I reflected during that week and since, not every group does that. And right now I'm in a number of different groups and they're wonderful, but this really was a special group of people. And it's a lifetime of friendships and I can't be more thankful. So thank you for that. But of course, the foundation of these friendships is not just that we all got along personally, but that there was such an exchange of ideas. There was such a need, I think, for each of us personally to be in person, to find new friends, to speak to peers in our industries, but then also meet people in person outside of our industries after almost 2 years of being so just in our own fields and in our own work because of the pandemic, not having those opportunities to be at galas or dinners or even conferences, outside of what we usually do day to day. So it was just an incredible opportunity. And that ideas exchange for me, it was a range of things. The most salient, I think, were the education conversations. Obviously, the apprentice program in Switzerland is something that I had read a bit about coming in. We had many panels about it. A lot of the education for me, of course, was the side conversations with my Swiss friends. I've brought that back here to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and tried to incorporate some of those ideas, and we'll continue to see what we can incorporate in our workforce and education discussions going forward. The global economy discussion, as you can imagine, was wide-ranging over the entire week. It's just incredible how much there is that happens in Switzerland. I believe it was Martin Naville from the chamber that said nothing happens without the US, but it often happens in Switzerland. And that stuck with me because in the US, we can certainly get a little bit US focused. And those of us who said yes to being members and fellows of the American Swiss Foundation. Obviously, we know and we are internationally focused, but it really takes being there and taking those lessons back to your own communities to help understand that the US isn't the only game in town. We're a very large part of the global economy, but the global economy doesn't work without key partners like Switzerland. So there's so much more that we talked about in terms of the global economy, global security, national security from a US perspective, from a Swiss perspective. Those conversations are still ongoing, I think, between us as peers, and I look forward to us continuing that dialogue in the months and years to come. In terms of leadership, for me, again, coming off of 2 years of COVID and being, for obviously necessarily, so focused on our community here in Scranton, keeping us safe here as a community has been paramount. There's been nothing more important. It was very helpful for me from a professional perspective, also from, I think, my own psychological perspective, to be able to get out, be not just in a new city or a new state, but a new country in a safe space where I could speak about some of the things that had been, bothering me, gaps that we've had in our institutions, places where I think we maybe have missed the mark and want to work on them. To Marcus's point, that free flow of ideas that you can have within a conference like we had in November is so important, because sometimes when you're fighting crisis, there are things that you might think but are not productive to say. So I'm very, very, very lucky to have been at this, and so happy to be able to continue these conversations. Thanks, Florian.
Thank you, Your Honor. Pierce, would you like to build on that?
You don't have to call me Your Honor, Florian, but I appreciate that. No, I think the mayor really, really summed it up quite well. I again, and Marcus reflected on this in his notes, but I think it is a testament to the American Swiss Foundation and the group that does cultivate a truly thoughtful, diverse group of opinionated people. And after being contained, so to speak, for a number of years, it was just genuinely a breath of fresh air that to be with people that think differently than you, not just necessarily from a different country, although that was of course amazing, but even for just the United States participants that were there. And it was just a constant reminder to me, and something that I will certainly take away from the conference, but how important relationships are, how important sitting across a dinner table or a lunch table with people that might think differently than you, and understanding them as human beings. Humans crave connectivity. They posted, the latest rounds of findings from that longitudinal Harvard study that says the number one thing that is most important to people's well-being is the strength of their relationships. And in a 1 week time, because of an incredible leadership of Patricia, Rachel, and then Vanessa, we had a curriculum that formed really deep relationships, and a group that, it blows up my phone at all hours of the day and night, because the text chain continues. And so just thematically, I walk away with a reminder that, as convenient as it is to do something like this, where people are in Zurich or all over the world, or in Scranton, Pennsylvania, or Texas, nothing beats the power of sitting in a room or having a meal and having a discussion where you can share your opinions and not worry that it's being recorded, which I know this is, as a side note, but that you can share and get to know people on a really personal level. Another thing that for me was really interesting, and I went wanting to observe and understand more, particularly from the Swiss participants, was, just how in Switzerland, although our countries are somewhat formed in a similar way, where they have a canton system, we have a state system. In Switzerland, there's way more emphasis on local controls and kind of a decentralized model. To me, I really was curious to study that, because when you look at their GDP per capita, it's incredible what Switzerland is doing. They are contributing as a very small country in a huge way to the betterment of humankind and to the world. And, I think part of that is because they have a decentralized form of government that empowers people in a local level to live lives to their fullest potential. And we certainly saw that in the 22 colleagues that were from Switzerland that were part of our class, Florian. Amazingly talented, gifted leaders of business, of finance, of pharmaceuticals, of the airline industry. We all got to experience the great joy of flying on Swiss Air. And And that to me is a really interesting thing. While US has an incredible GDP per capita itself, Switzerland's punching above us. And you know, I was fascinated to learn more about that and thematically take some of that back to, you know, I run an agency that covers much of Texas, not all. Texas is like, has the economy the size of Russia, so it's big. And just how do we empower teams, even within my own organization? A huge believer that when you can empower people in a decentralized way, they really live to their fullest potential. And I think Switzerland is just a shining example of that from a government standpoint. So it's really interesting to dig deeper into that and thematically take some of what I learned back.
Here's a perfect segue into this topic of the differences in political systems. Our American friends were struck by the fact that the Swiss political system is so strongly decentralized. And not only is it decentralized, but it's non-personified. Few people in Switzerland really know or care about who the Swiss president is at any given time. Local cantons, as you mentioned, and municipalities matter more than the Swiss federal government. So what can Americans learn from this? Can there be more of a focus on local political activity in the US instead of made for TV politicians? I think the mayor mentioned recently that it's harder to throw stones at a local mayor whose kids are riding their bikes down the road than it is to throw incendiary language at national politicians who spend their time on TV talk shows. Could you reflect a little bit, maybe we'll start with Pierce, could you reflect a little bit on those differences and what Americans can learn from the Swiss system of government?
Sure. So, you know, first of all, it's a great question, Florian. And Paige, the mayor's going to think I'm buttering her bread with my answer because I do think what matters locally is more important. My grandfather, who was president, Marcus, you are the ultimate Barbara Bush evangelist, by the way, with her wisdom. She was an incredible grandmother. But I remember once as a young person driving with my grandfather in his post-presidency, by the way, when his son was president, saying that ultimately what matters more to people's quality of life is their local elected officials. And frankly, you see that in America. Again, I'm in a place like Texas. This might be controversial, but I don't mind saying it. We're having a robust growth of people moving from all parts of the United States because the state policies here and the local policies here are very friendly for economic growth and for business. And people are moving because of opportunity. And you're seeing in places where in our own country where that doesn't exist, because of bad local leadership, because of bad local policies, people are straying. And so, you know, I think who is mayor really matters a lot. One other theme, though, I want to say, Florian, and I forgot to say this, but I think it is relevant because it's important. And it was certainly kind of layered into me and gave me inspiration to move forward and try to continue to make our country better. America remains the hope of the world. For Switzerland to extend and the companies that hosted us and the people that were there to treat us so well is such a reminder that we have an incredible responsibility as an incredibly diverse democracy to live up to that expectation and that hope. Every business leader that I talked to in Switzerland talked about how important the US markets were for their business. And so again, that is a responsibility when other countries look to us and say, we need you to be a healthy, strong reminder of what a democratic republic looks like. And so, yes, at a federal level, it is important. But to answer your question, I am a big believer that state and local politics deeply matter. And I'm not just trying to butter the bread of my colleague, the mayor of Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Pierce, that's beautifully said. What few people talk about is the fact that Switzerland is one of the most pro-American countries in Europe, actually in the world, with a very, very, not just long-standing institutional ties, but at the grassroots level, an instinctive pro-American stance amongst many people from different political stripes for many different reasons. Very well said. Thank you, Pierce. Mayor, your children ride their bikes, or your daughter will be riding her bike when she can ride a bike down the road. Would you prefer she be riding her bike down a Swiss road?
That's probably something I'll save for a Chatham House a session at some point. But to Pierce's kind words about local government, and I certainly am in this position because having been a federal government employee, and I absolutely loved it. It was an incredible training and an incredible perspective. I worked at the state level in Pennsylvania before I became mayor. Having worked at each level, I know very much firsthand that the local leadership matters the most, although it gets the least attention. And it was wonderful to spend a week in a place where the government is more local. I think the stat that sticks out is that 80% of the taxes stay local. I'm on the flip side of that as mayor of a small city up here in northeastern Pennsylvania that has been, I really don't like the term Rust Belt, but I know that that's a common term. You know, our economy has really had some struggles over the course of the last century, really. Our population, our economy technically peaked about 100 years ago when coal mining was still the very biggest energy source and industry in the United States. So there's been fits and starts, and we have a very bright future here. However, we have a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and my hands are tied in a lot of ways because, especially of state regulation, I find myself spending a lot of time with other mayors across the state advocating for the state to not preempt us on a host of issues. Big things like my ability to tax as I see fit. We have very, very strict tax laws, so I can't change the type of tax that we have myself. That's very strict on the macro level. The smaller level, that micro level, we have fireworks that are, people can just go out and buy commercial fireworks, which in a densely populated city like Scranton, you can imagine is not very pleasant, especially in the summer. So we're always fighting at the local level for more freedom of our policy and our legislation. Who's really heartening to be in a place that does that already and try to take some of that back with me as we launch into these continued fights here in Pennsylvania and in the States. There was another piece that we talked about where, I don't know who said this the best, but the issue's not people. That in Switzerland, you don't always know who the president, the rotating president is. You're talking about the issues, the political issues at hand, not the people. In the United States, we've gotten to this Hollywood-like, Twitterverse about people. It's always about people. Who's the president? The minute the presidential election is over, it's who's running in 2024. I'm not sure how we're going to get away from that. Maybe we never get away from it, but I think our job as mayors, local government leaders, is to continue to lift up local government, be really hands-on in our communities, provide results. That's the biggest piece. Provide results for people, show that government can work for them, and try to take some of it's not to take focus away from the importance of government at the federal level, but to take some of the energy off of the personalization of it. It's very distracting. I think it's to the point about, you're less likely to vilify someone whose child than someone you can just go and bash on Twitter. We've got to figure out how to make all of this work in the United States. It seems to be getting a little bit ahead of us, maybe a lot ahead of us. So it's up to us at the local level, not just in government, but nonprofits, business leaders, to really be, I think, building our services and our government and our institutions from the ground up in a time where there's diminishing trust in institutions.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question to both of you. Is there a single policy or structure or an institution or habit, perhaps, or custom in Switzerland that you saw that you wish was implemented in the US tomorrow, or that you would try to implement yourself, either in your own organization or in your own jurisdiction?
Yeah, I think that power that each canton has to determine the way that they tax and the way that they fund their governments would be very helpful. Ours, having all the taxation really at the top at the federal level and then trickle down makes it very difficult to make the decisions that we need to make. And I would say our education funding is the best example of that. So if we could have more control at the local level of how those tax dollars are spent, that would be extremely helpful.
Pierce? Sorry, so I'm mute.
I was muted, sorry. I would, just a quick answer, I think the mayor is right on. When you have a stronger local system, it's a more anti-fragile system. And again, the freedom of the United States, and we're seeing this anyways, even in our system that is not constructed maybe as well locally as Switzerland's is, people have the opportunity to choose, and people do move. They choose with where they buy their house. They choose where they choose based on the school district, et cetera. And so again, when you can empower local communities more and more with tax dollars, I think the mayor is right on. Look at that bipartisan agreement here on this, Florian. Well done.
Can I challenge you both, and maybe you'll be bipartisanly in agreement again, challenge you both a little bit. Switzerland is a small, relatively homogenous, and of course, very wealthy country on average. The United States is in the aggregate very wealthy, but there's a lot more socioeconomic diversity. It's not as homogenous, and it's much, much, much bigger with a lot of regional diversity. Would a decentralized system work in the US? Mayor?
It would certainly, we will by nature always need a larger set of federal regulations than a country like Switzerland. Absolutely. An example of where this could be better, and I think would work, that you'd have if we had at our city, we'd be able to say, this is what we need. Hey, state, hey, federal government, this is our proposal. Can you fund this? As opposed to what we have now, for example, with funding from the Housing and Urban Development Agency at the federal level. They have a formula. They say, okay, rents in Scranton are $750 a month. So these are the stats and figures that govern who gets money where. Rent is not $750 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, right? It's $1,200 or $1,300. So this top-down piece doesn't work very well. And if we could change some of these pieces where the information flows up from the bottom and the dollars, maybe extra dollars come down, that could really work. But to your point, we're always going to need more federal assistance in a country like the United States. We are so diverse. We do have poverty issues that Switzerland just doesn't face. And the flexibility that we need is also something that's there, where, to Pierce's point, we really are rapidly shifting. Even our own city is shifting very rapidly. What type of incomes are here? What type of families are moving here? And it's shifting very rapidly around the United States. So we need flexibility, and that information's got to come from the local level up to the federal. But I certainly have no illusions we would ever get as decentralized as Switzerland, nor do I think we should. So the answer, I think, is probably a mixture of both.
My only comments to that, and I somewhat agree with the mayor, but where I live in Houston, Texas, and people find this hard to believe, particularly from New York, but it is the most diverse city in America. It is incredible the amount of languages that are spoken in this community, and the different reasons that people have moved here from all over the world. I mean, it's truly amazing. And all I would say that when you look at Houston, in Texas in particular, you do have, at least in a state system, a more deregulated state, if that makes sense. So my belief of why people have moved here is because opportunity exists, Florian. So that certainly drives diversity, and people come from all over the world here to live a better life and to create opportunity for their family and for future generations. And so it does work even in a more diverse environment. I think that is a quick reason to dismiss certain things and just say, well, it's a little simpler. And I get there are certain things that federally should be mandated. I'm not saying let's just go totally, but look at what's happening here in this community that I live in. And it's incredible how opportunity has been created through a more kind of decentralized approach. So again, just a microcosm within the United States, but a strong example of how diversity can flourish in a deregulated way.
Thank you. If you allow me, we'll pivot to a slightly different topic, that of the Swiss educational system and apprenticeship system. We spent a lot of time, Bettina Schaller hosted a wonderful panel for us in November. And of course, we spent a lot of time discussing this topic. Your perspectives on that dual track education system and the very, very strong Swiss apprenticeship system, and frankly, your perspectives on the future of work at large. Mayor?
Yeah, the apprenticeship system is, and I think probably because of Switzerland's size, there's probably over time a better ability to put this in place, where I think we would struggle to put this in place at the federal level in the United States. And that's why I've been excited to see what we can do at the local level here to maybe pilot some pieces. I think that these types of things are just, for a country of 330 million people, it's tough for this to happen federally at this point. So we've got to go from the ground up. So I'm really excited about that potential here. Workforce development is this term that we throw around kind of casually here, but we're really trying to have it mean something. It does mean something here in Scranton specifically. We have an amazing junior college, community college, with a very innovative president who is willing to put programs in place for the future economy. And that might not sound, I know there's colleges and universities all over that do that, but the size that they are really helps them be nimble. So we're trying to do some of those pilot programs at a very small scale here. Something that struck me was that sports are not connected to schools, which I think is really, really interesting, a huge contrast to the United States. But there's some of those facts that maybe enable students to choose career paths based on where they would like to go academically and for their careers, not based on extracurriculars. And I'm not saying that we should divorce extracurriculars from schools in America necessarily, but that point really stuck with me because I think a lot of decisions here in the United States are based on those extracurriculars, and that might be, maybe that's a factor in why we have trouble connecting the dots between education at the high school level and the post-secondary level and job opportunities coming up. So we've got a lot of work to do in the United States. I think we can look at the apprentice system in Switzerland and that engagement between business and the education system. That's another piece here where locally we have lots of partnerships. We need to grow that more, where companies have a vested interest and are putting their money where their mouth is, putting systems in place to be able to work with kids from a younger age and help us build the pipeline. Because when you talk about the future of work, there are some massive gaps that are already here, certainly that are coming. Nursing would be a big one. There's some other pieces here in the United States that we've got to get on, or else our talent gap is going to be much wider than is desirable.
Yeah, just briefly, I think the mayor summed it up well, but I think we definitely can learn from the Swiss system. So that's kind of the headline answer. I think two big issues in the United States exist that if we lean more into an apprenticeship style system would be helpful. Number one, the student debt crisis is unbelievable. There's so many kids that I see that go to college and maybe don't finish for a number of reasons, and they end up without a degree and loaded with student debt, and it's just not helpful to anybody. The second point that I think was interesting that I got a sense of from the Swiss system is there is a dignity in career that certainly seems to be a cultural thing, and I feel like the United States again could lean into that and learn a little bit about that as kind of a value that we should set towards, if that makes sense. And so I think the apprenticeship helps address both of those in an interesting way.
We spent a lot of time discussing the state of the world in general, and you'll all smile when I say that the topic of China came up a lot. In fact, one panel was particularly dominated by this topic. Share with us, if you will, your perspective of maybe how the Swiss were thinking about it. Traditionally a neutral country, though, very member of the Western Bloc, of course. This is a rare area of bipartisan agreement domestically in the US. Help us share some of your perspectives on this and what you heard during that week in November. Chris, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think as you said, Florian, there is I don't know what the right word is, but people are very cautious about China. They're worried about the reports of, the freedoms of citizens that are being taken away or don't exist. And so, it's obvious why people are concerned about China. It's a huge economy. Interestingly, we are very interconnected with China. We know that. And so it was certainly a point of discussion, Florian, when it came to foreign affairs. I don't know if we had a solution to the problem by any means. I think relationally, China and the U.S. And maybe Switzerland and China as well, in a bilateral way, should start a China-America Foundation or American-China Foundation, so that relationally we could connect and learn what's true and what's not true, because the media certainly is a part of America's understanding of the issues in China as well. But I think the United States, is right to be wary of China, but I think we're also so interconnected. So it's a very complex, nuanced issue, in my opinion.
And Pierce, given the heightened level of anxiety and concern on this topic domestically in the US, could you serve as an advisor to Swiss business people and your Swiss friends? Should Swiss business people be wary of being too comfortable of doing business with China, given the current state of affairs in the US and elsewhere?
I mean, I don't know if I'm the right person, Florian, as a nonprofit executive in Texas, to answer that question.
Read the tea leaves. Read the tea leaves.
Well, I did get a sense from some of our colleagues who are leading businesses that they don't want a certain percentage of their business to be reliant upon China, because again, there's something about free markets and systems of government that are predictable. And in China, it's just not that. It's not necessarily a free system and as predictable. And so ultimately, as it relates to the US competing against China, Florian, I will say this: people always worry China's going to overtake us. I don't think you could compete with freedom. I think if you have one society that is autocratic or ruled with fear, you're going to ultimately lose out. That cripples humans' ability to live lives to their full potential. We saw it in the Cold War, where we were nervous about the Soviet Union, and look what happened. The system crumbled. Freedom, as messy as it is, will always win. In that messiness comes strength. I'm a big believer in the principles of anti-fragility. Certain things gain from disorder. And I think our American system is one of those things, as unpleasant as it can be, but it's worth protecting because of that. And so that doesn't answer your question, Florian, but I'm not an expert in China relations. So that's
you answered my question beautifully. I think you acquitted yourself. Superb answer. Thank you. Superb answer. Mayor?
I think that the lack of transparency from China is something to be concerned about, whether we're talking about economic and trade pieces or humanitarian pieces. The mess that sometimes, a lot of times, is America is out there. We don't hide that, right? It is out there. We are a democracy, very much a democracy at the federal, state, local levels. It's not pretty, but we're transparent about it. There's freedom of information. If somebody messes up, somebody's going to find out eventually. So you better raise your hand as quickly as possible. And people can judge others in government, based on, I think, how honest they are, because of the messiness of having things out in the open. It's a good thing. Contrast that with China. with their system of government, they don't have to be transparent because no one's going to the polls to vote. People aren't holding them accountable as a government because their books aren't open. So it's that lack of transparency that I would just continue to focus on, again, whether it's on the human rights side or the economic side. It's a very difficult thing to when the people sitting across the table from you are not showing you their cards in the way that yours are on the table.
Thank you very much. We've been given permission to go a few minutes over, so without wanting to, without abusing of your time, let me keep this going. Let me invite any attendees to ask any questions if you want using the Q&A function. We did receive 2 advanced questions from the audience, and I'd be interested in your responses here. The topic of leadership. Can the next generation of leadership be learned? And what are the characteristics of 21st century leadership? Mayor?
I think it's that necessity of transparency and honesty that drives leadership, or should drive leadership now, because everything is out in the open. Because if I leave my house right now and go to the grocery store, somebody can film me doing whatever it is that I do. Because we have technology, as we should, where all of Scranton's books should be open, and we're actually really excited because we're launching that in real time this month. We have the technology, and everyone has in the palm of their hand the technology for everything to be out there in the open. So at this point in leadership, whether it's private, nonprofit, public, you have to know that. You have to be able to be comfortable with every single action, whether on your time or your employer's time. And you have to be able to adapt to that. I think some people still don't want to, but at this point, the cat's kind of out of the bag. So we would ignore the need for transparency and honesty at our peril.
Thank you. Pierce.
So a few takeaways just about leadership that I think are important, and can the next generation of leadership be learned? I think that was your question, Florian. I think that as technology and as culture and as just human interaction in some degrees changes, that leadership stays the same. It should be centered around values. I think that's part of why, by the way, the Swiss-US relationship is so strong and so enduring. There is, even though we're an ocean apart, there is certainly strong, connected, deep values. And when you have those, when you can start at a foundational level of, hey, these are values we all agree with, from a leadership perspective, you can accomplish a lot of good things. And so I think I don't ever see values-based leadership changing. I think it's critical to running an organization like mine. I think it's critical to running a business. I think it's critical to running a city. And so, it was a strong takeaway for me, just by kind of understanding the Swiss-US relationship and how important values are and why those matter for leadership, just as developing a strong framework. And I think leadership can be learned, Florian. I think there is a misbelief and perception that, you're a born leader. I think it takes lots of trying and failing and being humble and learning. And so I think it can be learned for sure.
Leadership can be learned. No, it's well said, and it's a topic that has been much discussed with different views. I'd like to wrap it up. Realize we have received one question from the audience. This is a hefty question. It won't be answered easily, and so I will tweak it a little bit. Let me read it fully, and then I'll tweak it to make it a little bit more manageable in about a minute for each of you. And the question reads as follows: one of the main design features of the Swiss Constitution is its built-in protections for minority populations. Do you think the current US society would adopt constitutional amendments with similar effects? So of course, I want to state the obvious, the very long controversial history around the treatment of certain minority ethnic groups in the US Constitution, going back all the way to the time of the country's founding. My question to the two of you would be, could you ever imagine, given the current political climate in the US, do you see any scope whatsoever for any sort of constitutional amendments? For regardless of the topic, could you imagine scope for constitutional amendments, which require 2/3 of the state legislatures to adopt those, right? It's a very, very, very high bar. Pierce?
I was going to say, you should start with my colleague who's worked in the federal government before. I really don't know. I guess it maybe has happened once in our lifetime, I think, right? Where the amendment was added when we were young people, Florian. But that was like a process that took 200 years, I want to say, or something absurd like that. And I think it was ratified by 2/3 of the states. And I think there's certain things that are floating around, but it's just a very long process. I think it all comes down to interpretation of the Constitution. And we have seen certainly in the past few decades, meaningful civil rights legislation that has tried to make sure that we honor equal protections of the law and do create equal playing fields. I don't think anybody that I know and I interact with, wants to see any sort of discrimination, and certainly the government should be there to make sure that that does not happen. But in terms of answering the scope of, is a constitutional amendment likely? I think the Constitution, under the proper kind of understandings and laws by the Supreme Court and other things, has ratified that there must be equal protection, and you see the Interstate Commerce Clause and all these types of things that enforce that. So I don't know how to answer your original question, Florian. I don't know. I'm not a constitutional scholar to know how easy it would be to create an amendment, but I think that freedoms and making sure that we do have a more equal society are really important. So I totally support that. But go ahead to the mayor.
Thank you, Pierce.
I think couched that way, it would be difficult to get something like that through right now. I do think over the course of the next decades that potentially that would be possible. It's not right now. We have a lot of factors going into our different politics at the state and federal levels, especially. So I don't think a constitutional amendment on anything right now would probably go through, but we're clearly having a lot of kind of proxy battles over equality on voting rights and a woman's right to make her own choices. There's a lot of these proxy battles going on now. Over the decades, though, maybe we would be willing as a country to have a conversation about some of those constitutional pieces. But right now, I don't think that we're in that territory. We've got a lot of work to do to preserve our democracy and make sure people are trusting of the institutions, trusting that their vote counts. Got a lot of work, especially in these next couple of years, to make sure that foundation is solid before we would be going to a constitutional amendment cycle.
Mayor, any closing words, any closing statements? And perhaps I can coax one out of you. What was your fondest memory of that week in November?
I was going to say, I would love to just get on a plane and be able to do our week every 6 months or so, at least every year. And I'm drinking a coffee right now, but I really miss the coffee. No, it was just an incredible time. And of course, the Mount Rigi always sticks out in mind about how we really came together as a team because we had to hold on to each other for dear life. So I'm probably embarrassing here on the Americans, but there were some Swiss that slipped too.
Pierce, any closing statements?
Yeah.
Your fondest memory?
I mean, my fondest memory will be, and we reflected on this earlier, but just the friendships that in a very short period of time developed so naturally and so smoothly. That the place that Roche hosted us in, Florian, I see is on this chat, was like a yacht locked in the middle of Lake Zug. And it was beautiful. It was such an amazing place. And it was, the hospitality extended is something I'll remember for my entire life. And just the Swiss culture that we experienced was amazing. In terms of a single event, I loved the anniversary dinner. I thought that room was just so magical, how it was lit up, and energy in it and the connectivity that this organization has formed over the past many decades is tremendous. And it's certainly led to the economic engine that is driving where America is the biggest exporter from Switzerland. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, you cannot understate how important it is to form relationships and create understanding between all different types of people, particularly people that happen to be from different countries. And so just the fondness of being a part of that is something that will stick with me forever. And I'll always be a advocate and a fan of a beautiful country called Switzerland because of it. So
thank you both. I'm humbled and honored to call you both friends. So thank you again for everything. That's a wrap for us. Patricia.
Thank you. What a wonderful discussion we just got to witness here with a fabulous moderator. Thank you, Florian. You were incredible. Paige, thank you for your time. Pierce, so eloquent, both of you. Sharing with us your insights from your Young Leaders Conference. You talked about our political systems in the US and in Switzerland. You talked about educational systems that are different and where people can learn from each other. But perhaps most importantly, I think I'm going to take away the phrase, you can't compete with freedom, because that is what both the US and Switzerland are built on. It's a great desire for freedom and individual liberty. These are the values that we share, our two countries. It is our mission at the American Swiss Foundation to strengthen these shared values of liberty, the rule of law, and free enterprise. So thanks to you for coming together and sharing your insights to strengthen these values. And thanks for staying in touch. And thanks to all of the attendees for joining and listening in and working together with us to strengthen the relations between the United States and Switzerland on this person-to-person level that we cultivate through our programs. And with that, I want to thank you for your support, for your presence. This concludes our program. Thank you for joining us.